Martin, thank you so much for joining us here at the PLSA's annual conference. A fascinating panel. The Australian system is seen as hugely successful. Why is that, and what have they been able to do over the past decade?
I think what's the hallmarks of the Australian system and what's made it successful has been its universality and the fact that there is a hard compulsion to put money into superannuation. That, with 25 years of economic expansion and the miracle of compounding, has left many people with what are still modest but substantial balances.
Tell me about that compulsory involvement, because obviously we've got auto-enrolment in the UK now. Is that starting to mirror that and hoping to copy that system, if you like?
I think the element of auto-enrolment is that initial first step of getting people into a pension scheme. I think what makes the superannuation guarantee in Australia unique is that compulsory requirement for people to have 9.5% of their earnings put into superannuation every week, every month, every year.
How have people accepted that in Australia? Is it just seen as the norm now, and is that just something that has to evolve?
It is. It's taken 25 years to get to 9.5%. It's seen as a core part of the system, and it's part of a wider narrative around provision for your retirement. From the very early modest stages of 3%, it's grown over time to 9.5%. The plan is that in time we'll move to 12%.
What do you think about what's happening in the UK? And people talk about a pensions time bomb because people simply aren't saving enough. What can be done?
I think what we see when we look from the outside is that auto-enrolment's a very positive development. I think the recognition on longevity, the increasing challenges around the changing nature of work, and in an environment of low yields, I think what it's done is accentuate the very large gap that there is there between people's expectations of what their retirement might be like and what their savings and their retirement savings in particular were likely to deliver.
So it's almost showing people what that target needs to be, and that's something that is done in Australia.
Yeah, so ASFA publishes every quarter, it updates every quarter the ASFA retirement standard, and that's a very granular breakdown of what we believe you need to live a modest or a comfortable lifestyle in retirement. And so it takes very mundane expenditure like your grocery bill, your energy bills, your heating bills, your car, your health insurance, etc., adds them all up in a household budget to arrive at the amount that a couple will require to have. And we do it across three categories. We do it across the very minimal age pension category, we do it across the modest category, and the so-called comfortable retirement standard.
And you also use quite sort of familiar models, if you like. You even mentioned perhaps how many times would you like to have your hair cut and things like that, so people can really relate.
I think a key part of the success of the standard has been that relatability, the idea that we bring it to life in terms of the lists and what the difference between a very minimal age pension retirement feels like and what a more comfortable retirement feels like. So that speaks to, how often you'll be able to eat out, the extent to which you'll be able to go on holidays. Will you be able to afford private health insurance, which is a big part of the Australian health system? Will you be able to maintain and run a car? What sort of wine will you be able to drink? Will you be drinking wine from a box or wine from a bottle? And as you said, how often you might get your hair cut.
And do you think by doing that and making that illustration more clear that it appeals to more people who don't perhaps have a financial background as well?
I think it's important to recognise that the average retiree doesn't think in terms of deferred annuities, lifetime annuities, yield, asset allocations. They think in terms of, what's my life going to feel like? Will I be relying on public transport? Will I have to go on holidays and spend my holidays with friends and relatives? Or will we be able to go and afford a modest holiday, or maybe occasionally take an international holiday? And so bringing it to life with real examples, tangibilising the intangible, which is retirement funding. You
touched on it a moment ago. You talked about how work is changing as well, and that's something massive that we must embrace, that there is this gig economy and the structure is going to look very different.
I think the combination of massive automation and the impact that's going to have in the coming 25 to 40 years, the changing nature of the way effort in the economy is organised, the rise of the so-called gig economy means that traditional occupational pensions that presuppose the existence of an employer-employee relationship will be challenged. Inevitably, we'll see people dialing up and dialing down their careers, taking periods out, changing job, retraining. And in many cases being forced out of the workplace through obsolescence of their credentials and their qualifications. And all of those challenges means that we need pension and public policy settings and a retirement funding scheme that can respond to that. So we don't want to design something for 2017. We need to design something for 2077.
And with a change in the structures of work, if you like, possibly we need a change in the philosophy of what retirement is. You said we mustn't think of retirement as recreation.
I think the challenge at the moment is we saw retirement recreation, and what we had was the Reformation in Europe redefined work and made work worthwhile and a worthwhile endeavour. We've stuck with the idea that retirement is about recreation, and that was fine when we retired at 65 and we passed on at 70. If we're going to have 30 years of retirement between 65 and 95, the idea of funding a recreation for 30 years is just not sustainable, and it's probably not healthy and it's not financially viable. And so I think we need to rethink about what constitutes effort and valid effort in the economy. So as we transition into retirement, I think we'll see people maybe having jobs. I think more and more retirees will be beneficiaries of the gig economy, not victims of the gig economy. The ability to go online and find small jobs that pay a stipend. This could be about going back to your teenage years. We'll also see, I think, the rise of unpaid work, care activities in the community. And then as we transition in, I think, in that late 70s, early 80s, that third phase of retirement, I think, where we're likely to see much more of a recreation activity. But I think the automatic assumption that retirement is about recreation, I don't think is sustainable. I think we want to have healthy, enjoyable, fulfilling lives, and that can't be just about recreation.
Now, the Australian system has been held up as very successful for the fact that it has seen, obviously, people's pots grow and people now understand that they need this pot. But you've described what happens once they get the pot as not being such a huge success story. Tell me about that and what needs to happen.
So at the moment we're struggling with the post-retirement phase. There's no compulsory annuitisation, and the deaccumulation phase is very much there's a vacuum there at the moment, which is being investigated by government. The interplay between our age pension, the income and the asset test, the trade-offs between bequests, the family home, monetising the family home, has left Australia with many familiar challenges. And so typically we find older people, as they want to transition into aged care, find that they are asset rich but income poor, they're under consuming to the detriment of their health, and that their expectation of what they want to leave as a bequest is far beyond what the expectation of their children and dependents are. And so what we're trying to do is get the debate going around these trade-offs, and in particular broaden out the discussion around not just the funding of retirement, but the interplay with aged care, health care, the role of the family home, the role of the age pension, and of course retirement funding as we constitute it.
So problems in Australia, despite the success story there, it's a fairly gloomy picture, isn't it? I mean, you were, fairly candid in your panel. You described it as a sort of disaster on the horizon. What can be done, and how can that be mitigated?
I think what we're saying is not so much as a disaster, but alerting people to the fact that the confluence of, longevity, challenges in the broader economy around automation, the adequacy of the amounts that we're putting aside, combined with low yields, means that we cannot be complacent. The idea that we auto-enroll and that we make a very modest subscription into a pension scheme that somehow is going to miraculously deliver a well-funded recreational 30-year retirement is not sustainable. We know that these things are going to impact us, and we need to make the public policy decisions. So we need to get the contribution rates up. We need to make sure that we have a system that gets people engaged to the point they understand why they need these levels of contributions. But we also need people to understand, working longer is a healthier option. We need people to understand that maintaining their vitality assets, as Linda Grattan has talked about, is important. The system is not going to deliver wonderful outcomes unless we engage with it and continue to make the hard decisions from a public policy point of view. What I'm saying is that if we sit back and assume that the current levels of contribution with healthcare inflation and aged care costs going the way they are going to miraculously, reconcile, is not the case. We really do need globally to start to address this issue. And
we're sitting at a conference with 1,500 professionals who know this industry inside out. We're not sitting with the average Joe on the street who doesn't understand any of it.
And I think it's one of those things where people are worried about their retirement, and I think it's a huge opportunity and it's a huge public policy challenge. What we know, though, is that this problem can be solved. We've solved problems like this in the past. I think what we need to understand is that the fiscal sort of challenges that we face, the economic headwinds that we face, and the competing, I suppose, attention that's out there in the political environment at the moment means that sometimes the pensions public policy doesn't get the attention it needs. I think this is something that we have to focus on. We have to keep bringing it to the top of the political agenda. And I think we have to create a compelling narrative for people in the UK as to why pensions matter.
Fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us, Martin.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.